Hello and welcome to this Doctor Who Big Finish review. To celebrate Russell T Davies returning as showrunner, I thought it'd be interesting to take a look back on the story that started it all for him. His first novel, Damaged Goods. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about the adaptation by Jonathan Morris from Big Finish, though I will be referring to some of the changes that went through the adaptation process and do some slight comparison between the original book and the audio version. But before we start, I'd just like to ask, if you haven't already, please support the channel by hitting subscribe, turning on notifications, liking, commenting, and you can find and follow me on social media at the links here. Arriving on Earth in the mid-80s, the 7th Doctor, along with companions Chris and Roz, are investigating a mysterious new narcotic that is potentially extraterrestrial in origin. But they soon end up getting caught in the middle of the dramas and domestic lives of the residents of a estate loosely related to their investigation. And as time goes on, they soon discover a lot more going on than they initially were prepared for. One of the interesting novelties of Damaged Goods is getting to see just how much of Russell's original vision for his take on Doctor Who was planned all the way back when this came out. You can see the hints to all the stuff that will be very much present in his version of the show. The emphasis on relatable human drama and family dynamics, having a lot more stories set in the relative present in very domestic locations. Now, sometimes this type of story can get a bit dull, especially when you come to Doctor Who for its escapism and sci-fi creativity, but when this story came out, and back when the show initially returned, this format was an interesting concept and fairly novel, considering outside of maybe Survival, we didn't really get to see that side of the Doctor Who universe. And some of the hints towards what was to come are pretty on the nose, right down to the centre of the story being a working class family called the Tylers.
Sorry, you're saying we have a flat in this housing block?
Yeah, you're 2 doors down from us. Mr. Skinner, number 46. Don't cross him, he's got a hell of a temper. He's got a niece in the housing department. She saw your name's on the waiting list.
I see.
It's quite posh for the quadrant having a doctor. I'd take care of a title like that. You'll get kids knocking on your door for prescriptions and all the old dears of their aches and pains. I'd tell them to get lost if I were you.
So, this is ours, is it?
Not exactly much room for 3 of us.
Now, I'm sure you won't make too much noise. I've got a boy of 9, he's in bed early. And my name's Winnie. Nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too, Winnie.
Well, make yourselves at home. If you need anything, you know where I am.
Number 41.
That's right.
So it's exciting to see a Doctor like Sylvester McCoy in basically the equivalent of a series 1 to 4 style episode. And speaking of the 7th Doctor, I really like Russell's interpretation of his chess master persona and how it's implemented here. Typically, some stories tend to go 2 ways with this type of character. Either the 7th Doctor is in complete control and knows exactly what's going to happen, or he's put in a position where he's out of his depth. Here, though, they kind of go for a mix of those 2 together. While he has only a vague idea of what's going on, everything is set in motion by his future self following the events of this story, leaving everything in place for them to make the process and investigation a lot easier, so at least he knows that he'll get out of the situation, but doesn't know what the collateral damage is going to be, which allows him to have some degree of emotional attachment to characters like the Tylers, which makes the ending all the more emotional.
Bev, would you like a handkerchief? In fact, I picked her several of different colours, all tied together on a string.
Tar.
I'm really very sorry if I made you cry. I didn't mean to.
I didn't cry. I get hay fever sometimes.
Hay fever and bad memories can have the same effect. Bad memories can creep up on you when you least expect, even on glorious summer days. I got so many bad memories that if I started to cry, I could flood the world.
I don't remember because it was bad or anything. It just happened, that's all. Mum was talking to this tall man late at night, and I don't need telling what was going on. It was always the same old thing. She owed him money. She owed lots back then, ever since Dad left. She followed him out, and I followed her down to the street outside. And that's when I saw you.
I was there.
In the alleyway opposite. And you were looking at me, so don't deny it. Then this tall bloke drove off, and I ran back home. That's it. End of story, all right?
Are you sure, Bev? Is there something you've forgotten? Some detail? You can remember it now?
Remember.
Remember it, Bev? Remember why it makes you cry? Say it out loud for the first time in your life, and it will haunt you no more.
No! There's nothing more, so leave it, right?
Well, if these red hamlets are so important to the tale, let's have a look at them.
This was the first Big Finish release to feature the characters of Chris Quedge and Rosalind Forrester, adjudicators from the far off future, and because I mostly know them from their adaptations and appearances in other Big Finish works, I haven't really got the best chance to know these two characters, so I might not have as much attachment as someone who's read all their books and know their complete story. But for here, I think Chris gets a pretty interesting subplot where he teams up with one of the residents, Daniel, and the two share a romantic chemistry. You can definitely tell that Daniel is very much in self-insert for Russell, and what I was saying before about Doctor Who being a form of escapism, you can definitely tell that this is Russell's dream idea growing up, being offered hope that the future will be not only much more accepting of different romantic relationships, to the point that the prejudices that Russell faced during the 80s would be completely alien to someone from that time period. While this subplot is somewhat played for laughs, there is a undeniable tragedy to it. The fact that several decades later and a lot of those issues still exist is a shame.
So, after Mum and Dad chucked me out, Sylvie Harvey took me in, treated me as her own, and now she's gone, I look after Harry.
Shh! We're here.
What is it? You'll have to paint a picture. I never wear my glasses on a date.
Another part of the psyching up process. That group that just went in was armed with shotguns. They're gathering their strength.
Blimey. It's like the Long Good Friday.
I honestly have no idea what you're talking about half the time.
Oh, haven't you seen it? It's got Bob Hoskins.
No, I mean all this friend of Dorothy stuff. It's like you're talking in code.
You really don't know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I get that you're chatting me up. I just don't know why you have to be so oblique about it.
Oblique? Now there's a word. And what do you think? I should just ask you for a snog?
Yeah, that would probably work.
It would?
Try it. It's no big deal. Where I'm from, we have more important things to worry about than what gender somebody finds attractive.
As Sammy Joe said to Crystal's double, all cats are grey in the dark.
Okay, now I really do have no idea what you're talking about.
I think of the two, Roz is sadly the one who gets very little to do. This is probably the weakest story I've heard from her. Not that Yasmin Bannerman does a bad job, it's just the character isn't allowed to have any real connection with the rest of the cast compared to the Doctor and Chris. In regards to some of the things that they ended up changing from the original book, it was at first fairly basic stuff, like the narcotic that they were chasing was given a much more family-friendly name, Smile. The infamous Torchwood reference sadly wasn't in the original novel, which I think was a shame, since I knew that Torchwood was something that Russell was planning and was going to happen regardless whether Doctor Who was going to be made or not. So it would have been cool to have him set it up all the way back in this story. It's definitely something I would do. I know if I was in Russell's shoes and I got an opportunity to write a Doctor Who story, in the event that it was the only one I ever got to make, I'd definitely throw in some reference to a project outside of Doctor Who that I'd try working on, so I can technically make it an unofficial Doctor Who spin-off. For me, I think the most significant change is the ending, where certain characters who died in the book got to survive. I appreciate why. It doesn't ruin the ending per se. I feel in the book it was a lot more somber and emotional, and hits harder than it did in the adaptation. Back when this first came out, I'd kind of fallen out of love with Russell's style, given how commonplace it had become post his departure, to the point that it became more cliche. However, listening to it now and having a better understanding of his style, I was able to find a lot of the character drama and storylines much more captivating and endearing. I very much understood that what makes Russell's writing so good is just how passionate he is about all these ideas and stories, and as a result you really feel the emotion behind them. But overall, I'd thoroughly recommend Damaged Goods.